1380 WBEL. We're going to be talking about a topic. Actually, it might raise some surprise for you when it comes to this. And one of the things that's going on right now has to do with the topic of smokeless tobacco. And currently, what we're talking about here is something you may have heard about already. Miller Park in Milwaukee, as well as other Milwaukee sporting venues, announced last year a ban on smokeless tobacco. Our next guest says maybe that's something that should be reconsidered. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Louisville, where he holds an endowed chair in tobacco harm reduction research. For the last 20 years, Rodu has been, our next guest that is, has been involved in research and policy development regarding tobacco harm reduction. And he joins us right now to talk a little bit about smokeless tobacco. And he joins us on the morning program on the Big AM 1380 WBEL. It is from the University of Louisville. He's a professor of medicine, Dr. Brad Rodu. And Dr. Brad, thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it, sir. Dr.
Well,
Brad.
thank you very much, Ted.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ted. It's great to be here.
Okay, so you can hear me okay, can't you?
I sure can.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because we had that little delay there. I just want to make sure everything is kosher with the connection here along the way. One thing I know that you want to do before we get started here is mention about this new announcement by the Food and Drug Administration about tobacco. And so why don't you just go ahead with that, because I know that's something you want to bring up when it comes to the entire topic we're going to be talking about this morning.
That's right, Ted. The FDA Commissioner, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, recently announced that the FDA is going to refocus its efforts to deal with the problem, and that is smoke. Because when you burn tobacco and inhale smoke, you're inhaling thousands of toxins. So that's what gives you the risks for lung and other cancers, heart disease, stroke, emphysema. He said that what he wants to do is look at safer tobacco products like smokeless tobacco and e-cigarettes that provide nicotine, which doesn't cause any disease, in a far safer way. So that really is a transformation of FDA policy, and it leads us into a discussion of smokeless tobacco.
Okay, so basically, I know that one of the things that that you want to bring up is regards to, one of the things that is mentioned along the way is smokeless tobacco versus cigarettes, and really, there are a number of I think there's a general understanding that what's going on right now with common thought that smokeless tobacco can be something that can be hazardous to your health, something that is going to cause cancer along the way, something that's going to end up causing a number of ailments along the way, one or the other. And what you're saying is, when it comes, I guess, is it just to the cancer aspect you're looking at when it comes to smokeless tobacco, that it's not as great as as it is being claimed at this point? Is that what you're talking about these days, Doctor?
Well, that's exactly right, Ted. Most Americans believe that smokeless tobacco is just as dangerous or even more dangerous than smoking. In fact, scientific evidence over the past 30 years has conclusively shown that the risks from smokeless tobacco are so small that they basically are hardly elevated. And I'm not calling it a health food. Nobody's calling smokeless tobacco safe.
Right.
But it is vastly safer than smoking. And it's a great substitute for smokers who don't want to give up nicotine and tobacco altogether.
Now, the one thing I want to bring up with you, Dr. Rodu, has to do with, I know it's a campaign that pops up on YouTube all the time. Anybody who has seen anything on YouTube has seen these announcements popping up. I don't think they're public service announcements. I think somebody is paying for these announcements along the way. But it really talks about what can happen to your what I guess it's a situation where physically your mouth, a mouth cancer can happen from using smokeless tobacco, or for that matter, just basically a disease that basically eats away at your mouth or something like that. And the one thing I can say, and the one thing I want to mention too, I am not a user of smokeless tobacco, first of all, and secondly, I did smoke for a number of years, but I haven't smoked in 20 years. And the one thing I want to mention when it comes to this topic is that I remember when I was smoking, and I ended up getting a little bit of tobacco on my tongue along the way, and remember the burn that came from it, and really the displeasure that came from it along the way. Now, I want you to explain really a difference between smoking tobacco and smokeless tobacco, because basically that can help me to understand really what's going on with what we're saying here about the risks being minimized when it comes to smokeless tobacco. Because the thing is, from my experience with the tobacco on my tongue, I'm sitting there saying, why would anybody want to chew the stuff?
Well, we talked about smoke and how it creates 7,000 chemicals that basically give people risks for all those diseases.
Right.
Smokeless tobacco, there's no burning, so there's no smoke.
Okay.
And there's no toxins circulating through your system. Now, Ted, if I told you that smokeless tobacco doesn't have any risk for mouth cancer,
right,
you'd think you'd probably shut the radio off right now. My interview would be over.
Yeah.
But if I told you that a federal study published last year, all federally funded, showed that American chewers and dippers had zero risk for mouth cancer, and I could send you this study, well, that would change things, wouldn't it? It's the federal government putting out that information.
What organization was that?
Ted, pardon?
What organization was that? You mentioned the federal study.
Yep, the lead author was from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences.
Okay.
They call it NIEHS. All of the other 15 or 20 investigators that were authors were federally funded. It's a powerful study, and I blogged on the study in my blog, Rodu Tobacco Truth, back in January. Zero mouth cancer risk. And in fact, Ted, that's very consistent with all of the literature that I have been talking about for the past 23 years as I've researched this subject.
So, do you think that basically tobacco is just, smokeless is being lumped into a campaign, more or less? Because the one thing we're seeing as well when it comes to any sort of, we're talking about cigarette smoking, and now we're moving into e-cigarettes, and a number of people are using e-cigarettes for smoking cessation, and a number of groups are coming in and saying that's not safe either, because they're talking about chemicals, they're talking about the nicotine being a problem, and so we got a number of people who are really people who are regular users of e-cigarettes getting kind of up in arms about what's going on with those anti-smoking people who are lumping e-cigarettes in with, just regular everyday cigarettes. And I'm sure that, you've been mentioning you've been on the march for 23 years defending smokeless tobacco, and I'm thinking that this is all wrapped up in one major campaign.
That's exactly right, Ted. The federal government has numerous websites, and they all talk about a tobacco-free society. Mm-hmm. Now, that's just another fancy word for prohibition. So these people that trash smokeless tobacco and are now trashing e-cigarettes, which also have very, very low risk profile, they are trying to get people to basically become tobacco-free. And that simply isn't possible. Since tobacco was discovered by Columbus in 1492, it has spread to all countries in the world. It's a powerful and very satisfying and enjoyable consumer preference. And we have to be able to provide it in ways that don't kill people. And e-cigarettes join smokeless tobacco in that. You know, the British Royal College of Physicians, one of the most prestigious organizations in the world, has concluded that e-cigarettes are likely to be 95% less hazardous than smoking. Mm-hmm. So how can we deny smokers options that could save their lives?
We're talking with Dr. Brad Rodu. He's professor of medicine at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, and along with that, he is the professor of medicine at the university. He holds an endowed chair in tobacco harm reduction research over at the University of Louisville, joining us, talking about smokeless tobacco on the Big AM 1380 WBEL. And I know that it's with a lot of people, there's a big elephant in the room, and I have to ask you this, Doctor, because you're at the University of Louisville. An organization, a public institution in the state of Kentucky, which is a big tobacco-producing state. And I recently talked to a fellow whose family was in the tobacco farming business for a number of years, and it has become so unprofitable that he has switched over to doing some hemp farming instead now. And I'm sure that there are a lot of farmers of tobacco in the state of Kentucky that have gone through the same situation as this fellow who ended up switching over from tobacco to hemp. So they're probably asking, okay, this guy works for the University of Louisville. And they're thinking there's some sort of vested interest here when it comes to the state of Kentucky and tobacco farming, and that as a part of the economy of the state of Kentucky. I want you to respond to that.
Ted, it's everywhere on my blog and in all my writings. My research is supported by unrestricted grants from tobacco manufacturers to the University of Louisville. The university manages those grants just like it does grants from the federal government and any other pharmaceutical manufacturer or any other industry. Personally, I have never, since 1994, taken a single penny from any vested interest in the tobacco issue. I live on a professor's salary. I'll retire on a professor's pension, period.
Okay. Now, have you say, for example, have people, we're talking about Major League Baseball and the fact that they're trying, to rid the sport of smokeless tobacco. We already mentioned about what's going on in Milwaukee when it comes to Miller Park and other sports venues when it comes to smokeless tobacco. Have the people in Major League Baseball gotten in touch with you? Or for that matter, because you have a minor league team, a AAA team in Louisville, have they gotten in touch with you, when it comes to what you're saying and more or less, tried, in their minds, tried to set you straight about what's going on?
Well, no. Basically, the campaign to ban smokeless tobacco in ballparks is being run by a prohibitionist organization out of Washington called the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Now, I respect Major League Baseball and the minor leagues. They can do whatever they want with their players, and they've banned it, except at the majors where they have the Major League Baseball Players Association to deal with. They can ban it among their players because they basically, they own them, and they can do what they want. But I have a bit of a problem with the ballparks and the fans because smokeless tobacco can be used discreetly with very little, if any, spitting. And I don't believe the major league ballparks should be telling fans that they can't use smokeless tobacco when they're selling them alcohol and then sending them home in cars. So I think there's a kind of a discrepancy here between their policies. And, the other thing is it's not really practical. I mean, are they going to do mouth checks and do searches at the gates? It's just kind of too far to have gone with this tobacco-free society.
Dr. Brad Rodu joining us. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Louisville, and he's also, as we mentioned, endowed chair of tobacco harm reduction research, joining us on the morning program on the Big AM 1380. Why don't you pass along that website once again that you mentioned regarding the research that you've done, Doctor?
Well, my research is all outlined and discussed on my Tobacco Truth blog. That's Rodu, R-O-D-U, Tobacco Truth. People can get a lot of information about the real benefits and risks of using all tobacco products, including cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, and e-cigarettes.
Okay. Well, tell you what, it's a real conversation starter, to say the least. That's for certain. So, Dr. Brad, we thank you for joining us this morning and bringing the issue up. We appreciate it, sir.
Great being here, Ted. Thanks a lot.
It's our pleasure. 7 o'clock at the Big AM 1380.
The Prep Corner.